If you've been thinking about trekking in Nepal, chances are you've come across the Everest Base Camp Trek or the Annapurna Circuit. A quick Google search would overwhelm you with articles, reports, videos and guides on these popular trails, whether written, podcasted or filmed for YouTube. But when it comes to the lesser known paths in Nepal, this helpful flood of information quickly dries up. One of the most adventurous and remote trekking regions in Nepal is the Kangchenjunga Himal in the far east of the country. The trails here lead you to the foot of the world's third highest mountain, and they're practically empty, especially compared to the well-trodden paths around Everest or Annapurna. Another thing that's a lot emptier are the search results that you are getting when you try to find useful, up-to-date guides about the treks here. While you might find some pieces of information, most likely on the North Base Camp Trek, many of these scarce sources might be outdated, not very accurate, or in a language you don't understand. In this video, we're going to provide everything you need to plan your trek to, and if you like, halfway around the world's third highest peak.
Namaste, Tashilik, and welcome back to The Man Who Stared at Mountains, and welcome to Kathmandu. I just arrived here after an almost 3-week trek in the Kangchenjunga Himal. In that trek, me and my friend Chandi, we visited the North Base Camp of Kangchenjunga. We crossed Selilila and a number of other mountain passes to go on the south side of the mountain. And there we went to Oktang Viewpoint near the southern base camp of Kangchenjunga. You can watch all of this in detail in the videos that I link now on your screen. In this video, however, we will tell you everything you need to know if you want to do the Kangchenjunga trek yourself. We will discuss itineraries, we will discuss how long that takes, how you even get to Kangchenjunga. So we will show you all the transport options you have. We will discuss whether you need a guide or not. We will discuss permits. And then we will compare not just the 3 treks to each other, we will also compare them to all the other popular treks in Nepal so that you get a better feeling about whether you actually want to do them or not.
Here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll go over the 3 main trekking routes within the Kangchenjunga Himal: the North Base Camp Trek, the South Base Camp Trek, and the full Kangchenjunga circuit. I'll give you a basic itinerary for each of them and some tips for altitude acclimatization and day trips. Next, we'll cover the best ways to get to the region and back as quickly and convenient as possible. Then we'll discuss the important stuff: permits, guides, altitude, difficulty, safety, remoteness, and accommodation. I'll also give you a glimpse into the breathtaking landscapes and rich culture that awaits in far eastern Nepal. And don't worry if you're only interested in one specific trek. I'll break down everything separately. By the way, if you're rather looking for a particular topic, check out the chapter bars below to jump straight into the section you need. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's dive into the map and start planning. The most popular trek in the area is the one up to Kangchenjunga North Base Camp. Historically, this trek started in or near the town of Taplejung. We will show you how to get there in a few minutes after we explore the actual trekking options. In recent years, the trail from Taplejung down to the Tamor Nadi River Valley has been largely replaced by a rough dirt road. Plus, there is a huge hydropower plant under construction, so the valley is no longer as peaceful as it used to be. Because of this, most trekkers skip the first 2 days of hiking and endure a 4 to 5 hour cheap ride to Ranipul instead. Ranipul is the place where the Tamor and the Gunsa rivers meet. Accommodation is available directly in Ranipul, 1 hour further in Itinerary, and another good hour further in Lamata. The trail to these homestays take you through several cardamom plantations and into a dramatic little canyon. If you arrive in Ranipul in the early afternoon, both places should be easily reachable before nightfall. The next stage takes you to Gunsa, typically over 2 days. About 2 hours beyond Lamata, after a steep climb, you will reach Amjilosa, where several lodges are available. Another 2 hours and quite a bit of Nepali flat further is Tangyang, a small place with a modern lodge, and then after another steep climb, you'll reach the village of Gyabla. Gyabla is bigger than anything you've passed so far and makes for a great overnight stop. 3 to 4 hours from Gyabla bring you to Phale, a Tibetan refugee village on a large plateau from where it's just another hour and a half to Gunsa, the largest town in the region, at 3,400 meters. Gunsa, much like Namche Bazaar or Manang, is a great place to take a rest day for acclimatization. While here, you can visit one of the oldest gompas in eastern Nepal, hike to Yamatari Glacier, or you can simply enjoy a cake and the peaceful atmosphere in the village. From Gunsa onward, your daily stages are pretty much set, as there are no further villages but rather strategically placed clusters of lodges. Those are in Kangchenjunga, 1 day's hike above Gunsa, and in Lonak, 1 more day further up. In Kangchenjunga, you can and should have a rest day and check out the impressive Janu viewpoint. You'll be standing right in front of 3 huge mountains, with Janu itself measuring almost 7,800 meters. Lonak marks the end of reliably open lodge infrastructure in the upper valley. From there, it's a mere day hike to Phangphema, the site of Kangchenjunga North Base Camp, and back. Be aware that due to unstable glacier moraines and several landslides, this trail is now a lot harder than it used to be. Most people need between 4 and 5 hours to reach Phangphema and probably another 4 to get back to Lonak. Weather permitting, Phangphema offers mind-blowing views of the Kangchenjunga North face. If that is still not enough for you, you can scramble up the slopes of Dromuri, the hill right behind the tea house, to get an even better angle. Talking about the tea house. Besides the lodges in Kangchenjunga and Lonak used as overnight accommodation, there are also a number of tea shops in the upper valley, which are commonly used as lunch stops. These are about 2 hours below Kangchenjunga, about 1 hour below Lonak at Ramtang, and as mentioned at Phangphema itself. However, these tea shops are only open in the high season. Don't rely on these tea shops without making sure that they are open. To summarize, most trekkers will need 3 days from Taplejung to Gunsa. It's recommended to add a minimum of 2 rest days, most commonly done in Gunsa and Kangchenjunga. From Gunsa to Lonak, it's 2 days of trekking. From Lonak, you will need 1 day to go to Phangphema and back. Expect 3 to 4 days to retrace your steps back to Ranipul, which gives us a minimum of 11 days of trekking. Many hikers will likely take a few days more. Keep in mind that you will need at least 4 more if you plan to hike between Taplejung and Ranipul. In this case, we're talking about a minimum of 15 days. Also, all these numbers exclude the time needed to travel to Taplejung and back, which we will talk about in the next chapter. Before that, let's look at the Kangchenjunga South Base Camp trek. For this trek, you have 2 possible start or end points. One of the 2 options is very near to Ranipul above the village of Helok. The trailhead itself is called Zero Point and sits between Helok and the hamlet of Yasang. Like Ranipul, you can reach Zero Point by jeep within 5 hours from Taplejung. There are now 2 lodges available, roughly 2 hours above Zero Point and 1 hour above Yasang. From these lodges, it's 1 long and tough day of hiking up the Simbuva Kola Canyon to reach the small village of Totong, locally called Torongden, which is also the place where your 2 trail options converge. The second option starts further south in the Kabeli Kola Valley near the villages of Yamfudin and Sherpagaon. From there, you have to climb across a ridge, passing the 3,300 meter Lazia Banyang, and then descend steeply down to Totong. As of 2024, there is a new trail under construction bypassing Lazia Banyang and instead taking you via a place called Naya Jareni, providing easier access to the Simbuva Kola Valley from the south. But I haven't walked this new trail yet. Please post in the comments below if you have already tried it. I'm interested to learn more about it, and I'm sure many of the other viewers are as well. From Totong, it's 1 day of trekking up the river to the lodges of Cheram. After about 2/3 of the way, you'll reach a building at a clearing called Anda Fedi, which is supposedly a tea shop, but I am not sure if it's still operational. If it is, it's definitely only open during high season. Cheram is a cluster of 3 to 4 basic lodges rather than an actual village. It's also the place where the Sele Lela trail meets the Simbuva Kola. But we will talk about this one after we finish describing the Kangchenjunga South Base Camp trek. Cheram sits at over 3,800 meters, which means it's about time for acclimatization. In fact, sensitive people should consider scheduling a rest day in Totong already, but at the latest in Cheram, a rest day is really recommended for everyone. You can use the day to check out the little lake at about 4,400 meters next to the Sililila trail. From Cheram, the trail climbs steadily along the river and takes you to Ramche within half a day. Ramche is also not really a village, but rather a yak pasture with a few tea houses, right next to the giant Yalong Glacier. The tea house at the northern end of Ramche is considerably newer and more comfortable than the others. While Ramche's meadows are flat like a frying pan, you'll be surrounded by spectacular 6,000 and 7,000ers. Especially Ramtang and the south face of Kabru are jaw-dropping. The actual hike to Oktang viewpoint near Kangchenjunga South Base Camp only takes about 2 hours and is not very difficult, while the views there are absolutely staggering. The several peaks of Kangchenjunga appear as one long ridge on the horizon in front of you. The actual South Base Camp, however, is on the other side of the glacier and firmly out of reach for the common trekker. After soaking in the views at Oktang, you have to descend the valley the same way you climbed it up. As mentioned before, at Cheram, you can connect to the Selelila trail, and at Tortong you have to decide whether you want to exit via the lower Simbuva Canyon towards Yasang and Helok, or whether you want to climb across the ridge at Lazia Banyang and exit via Sherpagaon and Yamphudin. To briefly summarize the required time, using the trailhead near Helok and staying above Yasang the first night, most trekkers would reach Cheram after 3 days total from Taplejong. Spend a rest day there and reach Ramche after day 5. After visiting Oktang in the morning, you can make it down to Tortong in the same day if you are fast and in good shape. Slower hikers will need 2 days to get from Ramche to Tortong. Getting back to the trailhead near Yasang is possible in one long, tough day, which gives us an absolute minimum of 7 days of trekking for this trek. Choosing the southern walk-in and exit via Yamphudin would add 1 day for each way. Besides these two standalone up and down kind of treks, you can create an epic Kangchenjunga circuit type trek by simply combining them. You can hike from the Gunsa Kola Valley to the Simbuva Kola Valley or vice versa by crossing a series of 3 or 4 mountain passes, including Selelila and Sinilapchila. From Gunsa, hike south to the small local hydropower plant. There, the trail starts climbing steeply through a beautiful rhododendron and pine forest. At an altitude of roughly 4,000 meters, you leave the forest and enter a high alpine shrub landscape. There's a small tea shop there, but it's only open in high season. After a total of 4 to 5 hours from Gunsa, you will reach Selelefedi, a cluster of 2 or 3 basic tea houses. Leave Selelefedi in the early morning, and about 2.5 to 3 hours later, you will have climbed your first pass, Selelila, at roughly 4,600 meters. In clear weather, you will have fantastic views of Janu. If you're lucky, you can even see Makalu and Mount Everest in the distance. At Selelila, the toughest part of the ascent is over. Instead, you are now presented with 2 to 3 hours of Nepali flat, taking you across 4,650 meter high Mirginla before having you climb the 4,700 meter high Sinilapchila, the highest point of the crossing. From here you can spot not only Kangchenjunga itself, but also Talung, Kabru, Ratong and the mighty Yalung Glacier below them. I should probably mention that there is no universally agreed upon naming of these passes. Different sources assign the names Selelila, Sinonla, Mirginla and Sinilapchila to the physical passes in different orders. What's important for you to know is that all 3 or 4 of them are between 4,600 and 4,700 meters high, and that as long as there isn't too much snow, the trail between them is not too difficult. The trail between the last pass and Cheram at the bottom of the Simbuva Kola Valley, though, is longer and steeper than the trail between Selelefedi and the first pass. You might need up to 3 hours to descend to Cheram. It's well possible to trek the Kangchenjunga circuit in both directions. An argument could be made for doing it clockwise, considering easier acclimatization on the Gunsa side and an easier climb up to the Selelila pass. After all, Gunsa sits lower than Cheram and has a lot more to do. Additionally, the Janu viewpoint offers a great day hike from Kambachen, which people hiking counterclockwise might be inclined to skip. As for the time needed to trek the Kangchenjunga circuit, we estimate a total of 12 to 15 days if using the 0-point trailhead near Helok as the start or finish of your South Base Camp leg. A walk-in or exit via Sherpagaon or Yamphudin would require a day or so more. Keep in mind, all this is excluding your travel time to Taplejong and back. And since I mentioned it several times already, let's finally talk about the elephant in the room. And that is traveling from Kathmandu to Taplejong and back. And this is potentially a bigger elephant than some of you might think. Taplejong does have an airfield, but scheduled flights from Kathmandu? Those are rare. maybe once or twice a week, depending on the season. Even then, cancellations happen frequently, often with very short notice. So unless you're trekking with a large group and can afford to charter a whole plane, this is probably not an ideal option. So, how do you get to Kangchenjunga? Well, you'll have to start by flying from Kathmandu to Chandragarhi Airport, which is near Bhadrapur in the southeast corner of Nepal. Remember, Kangchenjunga is way up in the northeast, and while it's just 120 kilometers away as the crow flies, you have got the Himalayan foothills in your way, and you will have to cross these, which means you've got some serious travel ahead of you. Most groups arrange a private jeep beforehand, but if you haven't, no worries. You can find public jeeps at a place called Charali, about 10 kilometers north, where the national highways 1 and 2 meet. To get there from the airport, you do as one does in hot and muggy South Asia and take a tuk-tuk for probably 25 minutes. The jeep ride from Charali to Taplejung will only cost you about $15 to $20, which is nice, but it will take roughly 9 hours, which is less nice. If you're on the first flight of the day and don't waste too much time, you can make it to Taplejung in one long day, arriving after nightfall. But if you start later, it's better to break up the journey, find a hotel and continue the next day. Possible overnight stops along the way include Kanyam, Ilam or Fidim, located about 2, 4 and 7 hours into the drive respectively. When taking the jeep, make sure you're not in the back row, as the seats there are not just lacking legroom, but even footroom. Avoid them at all costs and thank me later. The good news? The road is paved all the way to Taplejung, which isn't always the case in Nepal's mountainous regions. So, congratulations, you made it to Taplejung, and all that's left between you and finally starting a trek is another 4 to 5 very bumpy hours in a local jeep to Ranipul, the starting point for the North Base Camp Trek, or the Simbuva Canyon Trail to the South Base Camp Trek. If you're heading to the South Base Camp via the Kabeli-Kola Valley, you'll need to branch off before reaching Taplejung to get to the villages of Kebang and Yamfudin. In summary, getting to Taplejung and its surrounding trailheads will take at least one very long day or 2 more comfortable ones. And the same goes for the return trip, with the added caveat that there are hardly any evening flights from Bhadrapur to Kathmandu. Most flights happen in the morning, so you will need to spend the night either near the airport or somewhere along the way. Kanyam and its tea gardens are a nice option for that. In total, you should add at least 2.5 to 3 days to your trekking itinerary just for the travel, and that's assuming everything goes to plan, so always allow for extra time. If that sounds like a lot of things to plan and organize, I have good news for you. This will all be done by your trekking agency. If you want to trek without involving one, I have, however, bad news for you, because you have to. The Kangchenjunga Conservation Area is one of the few restricted areas in Nepal where hiring a guide is compulsory. Whether you hire a guide only for a daily rate or whether you buy a full package including accommodation, food and even porters or anything in between the two is totally up to you. But since the Kangchenjunga Conservation Area is a restricted area, you need to be with a licensed guide. On the bright side, considering its restricted status, Kangchenjunga is actually very affordable in terms of permits required. Each trekker needs the Kangchenjunga Conservation Area ticket, which is 2,000 rupees, so roughly $20. Additionally, you need the Taplejung Area Special Permit, which is also 2,000 rupees, but per week. While the prices themselves are, in my opinion, fair, there is a catch though. The special permits are only issued to groups of minimum 2 trekkers. In case you're a single trekker and don't want to join a group, you will have to find a trekking agency which is able to register a so-called ghost trekker. While you don't need to know the details of how this works, you will have to pay the special permit fees for your new imaginary friend. Which brings us to the topic of costs. As mentioned, the KCA ticket is $20. The special permit is $20 per week, and since singles need to pay for 2 of them, $40 for single trekkers. As for transportation, you can plan roughly $150 for the flight to Bhadrapur and the same for the flight back. The public shared jeeps to Taplejung will probably cost about $15 per seat. A jeep from Taplejung to Ranipul will set each one of you back another $10. The prices for the way back are the same. If you hire a private jeep to have more space or to make the ride fit into your schedule, you'll of course pay a lot more than that. Keep in mind that you will have to pay the transportation cost for your guide as well. Road transport prices will be identical to yours, but the flight tickets are discounted for locals. If you don't opt for a package, you'll have to pay for your accommodation and food. That will cost about $20 per person per day on average. If you include things like snacks, soft drinks, beer and the like, you should allow a budget of about $30 per person per day, or more if you plan to consume a lot. If, just to give an example, we look at a 15-day Kangchenjunga North Base Camp trek with a guide only on a daily rate basis, each trekker would pay approximately $1,000, $60 for permits, $350 for transport, half of the guide's transport costs, which might check out at roughly $100, and personal expenses of about $450 to $500. While you're probably able to book and pay your flight tickets and the agency in US dollars, keep in mind that all payments on the ground have to be made in Nepalese rupees, and most importantly, in cash. There isn't a difference in the daily costs for any of our 3 trekking routes, but different trek lengths result in different costs for the special permit. If you do the South Base Camp trek, a special permit for just 1 week will probably be enough. For the North Base Camp trek and the full circuit, you will definitely need a 2-week special permit. Next, let's look at the maximum altitude of each route and the other challenges and dangers you might face along the way. The highest point on the North Base Camp trek is roughly 5,200 meters when crossing the last landslide before reaching Pangpema. The highest night you spend on the trek will be in Lonak at 4,750 meters. We recommend 1 acclimatization day each at Gunsa and Kambachin. The highest point on the South Base Camp trek is the viewpoint at Oktang at roughly 4,800 meters. The highest point you will sleep at will be Ramche at about 4,500 meters. Despite both these places being lower than their counterparts on the North Base Camp trek, acclimatization might actually be more difficult on this side. Totong is a tiny hamlet at less than 3,000 meters and not necessarily appealing as a place to spend a rest day. Cheram sits at almost 3,900 meters and therefore at an altitude where some people can already run into serious trouble. The safest, but admittedly not very entertaining option would be a rest day each at both places. The highest points on the full Kangchenjunga circuit are the same as on the North Base Camp trek. The passes you have to cross between the 2 valleys are lower than both of the base camps. Of course, you'd acclimatize better for those passes by tackling the North Base Camp side first, making them a little easier. Let's move on to things that are not easy and talk about how difficult our 3 Kangchenjunga treks are. In general, the North Base Camp trek is a little harder than the southern side, and all things considered, actually one of the hardest of Nepal's Great Lodge treks. The things that make it difficult include a couple of very steep climbs in the lower Gunsa River Valley. While the trails, except for a few narrow spots, get easier above Gunsa, there is a different reason why this trek might be challenging for some. The stage lengths are all fixed due to the lack of villages. While in other regions, especially in the Khumbu, you have an abundance of options to stay and therefore to cut your days exactly as long or short as you want them to be, around Kangchenjunga your itinerary is fixed from the moment you leave Gunsa. In high season you can find some tea shops to serve as lunch stops in between, but those are not meant for the majority of trekkers to stay in. The final day hike to Pangpema is a further obstacle. It's really quite difficult. There are several landslides to cross and you will have to climb a few really steep slopes doing so. And all that at an altitude of 5,000 meters and above. The Kangchenjunga South Base Camp is shorter and lower. Also, the final push to Oktang is tremendously quicker and easier than the hike to Pangpema north of the mountain. It's still not an easy trek though, especially the approach to Totong, regardless of whether you choose to climb up from Halok near Ranipul or whether you start in the Kapilikola Valley will be tough. This also applies for the way back out. In the upper parts of the Simpuvakola Valley, the main challenge is that Totong and Cheram are, as mentioned, not ideally placed for acclimatization. The trails themselves in the upper valley are actually quite easy to trek. With the North Base Camp trek checking out at 4.5 and the South Base Camp trek at 4, we will rate the difficulty of the circuit a 4.5 as well. While the passes are not exactly easy, they are by no means more difficult than other high passes in Nepal, which means the most difficult points on the circuit are the ones I've already mentioned before. Which leads us on to the topic of safety. And, spoiler alert, the treks around Kangchenjunga will not score high ratings here. Therefore, let me just quickly point out. We award these safety ratings so that you can compare all the treks in Nepal to each other, should safety be a major concern for you. A low rating here means that other treks might be more safe in comparison. It doesn't mean that these treks are inherently dangerous. The vast majority of risks on Nepalese lodge treks can be completely avoided with sufficient preparation and common sense. With that out of the way, let's look at our 3 treks. The first point applies to all of them. In case anything bad happens, rescue is comparably hard to organize. Phone reception is hard to come by in most of the area. We will talk more about this in a bit, and the nearest third road might be up to 5 days of hiking away. More if you are slow, for example due to an injury. And once you reach the road, the next large cities, Birtamot and Taran, are both still 1.5 days of driving away. Even a helicopter rescue, provided you are able to organize one, would take considerably longer than out of other trekking regions. Kathmandu is a good 250 kilometers away as the crow flies. There is a small health post in Gunsa, but that might not be sufficient for serious incidents. Thus, here it's all about minimizing risks, as the consequences might potentially be a bit more severe than on other treks. On the North Base Camp trek, you should be particularly careful wherever the narrow trail crosses a steep slope, especially if the trail is slippery. Another dangerous spot is the rock slide area about 1 hour above Lonak and the Kando icefall you got to cross shortly afterwards. Also, be aware that outside of peak season, these trails are not very much frequented. Chances you'll be found by passersby are slim. Make sure to tell the people in the lodge where you're about to go next. Talking about people in the lodge, the couple owning the Jonga family home in Gunsa and the White House in Kangchenjunga hold regular radio contact between the villages to keep track of who goes up and down each day in order to try and monitor if anyone might get lost. So a big shout out to them. The trails on the southern side don't have any particularly dangerous sections. The reason for us to give it a low rating anyway are the complete lack of monitoring, lack of phone reception or other means of communication, and the remote location, which makes any rescue activities very complicated. But again, the trail is not more dangerous than others and less dangerous than the North Base Camp trail. The very same applies to the trail connecting both valleys. There is no phone-based communication and not much traffic on the trail, but the path itself isn't dangerous. Therefore, the rating for the full circuit is the same as for the North Base Camp trek as a standalone. And since we now talked so much about phone reception already, let's directly move on to the remoteness of our 3 treks. In general, the area is about as remote as you can go in Nepal without camping equipment. You will have phone reception from Taplejung all the way to Ranipul and then again in and around Gunsa. You might even manage to catch a very weak data signal in Gunsa, enough for texting. For that, make sure to choose a Namaste SIM card from Nepal Telecom. As far as I know, Ncell has no network around Kangchenjunga, but please correct me on that if I'm wrong. Apart from in and to a limited extent around Gunsa, there is no point on the trek where you'll have phone reception. There is also no Wi-Fi to be found anywhere. Some older sources claim that the local health post in Gunsa offers Wi-Fi, but that is out of service for a few years now and it wasn't working in the spring season of 2024. But by all means, please check it out and post in the comments if it comes back in the future. Additionally, Gunsa is also the only place with reliable electricity. Other places have to rely on solar power and don't offer charging of devices, so bring spare batteries and power banks. Also, take them into your sleeping bag along with you at night so that they don't discharge due to the cold. The situation on the South Base Camp trek is quickly summarized. No phone signal, no Wi-Fi and no electricity. Nothing whatsoever, so plan accordingly. The circuit therefore would get a 4.5 due to the text messages you might or might not be able to send out of Gunsa. Best regards to your family at home. Now, let's talk about accommodation. And yes, I know what you might be thinking. Remote area must be bleak, right? Well, you wouldn't be entirely wrong if you compare it to more developed trekking areas like the Khumbu or the Annapurnas. But here's the good news. Most of the tea houses, even the really basic ones, are surprisingly cozy. In spring 2024, most of the places we stayed at on the North Base Camp trek offered menus, though outside of the peak season you'll probably only find simpler dishes like chow mein or fried rice. And in the most basic tea houses around Kangchenjunga, well, it's pretty much dal bhat every day. If you enjoy larger, sturdier lodges, you can find them in Gyabla and Gunsa, and that's pretty much it. But while we're talking about cozy places, I have to shout out the Jonga family home in Gunsa again. Easily some of the coziest rooms I've stayed in across the whole of Nepal. They also run the only bakery in the entire area, so if you're tired of munching on Snickers, treat yourself to some delicious cake there, even if you're not staying with them. Another culinary highlight is the pizza in the White House in Kangchenjunga. Now, a word of warning. If you're hoping for a lot of Western-style plumbing, you'll be disappointed. In 2 weeks of trekking, I found exactly one Western toilet in Gyabla. Apart from that, you'll be doing a lot of squatting. Switching over to the South Base Camp trek or the Simpuvakola Valley, the accommodation is more basic. There aren't any villages as big as Gunsa or Gyabla, so the lodges are simpler. You won't find big menus, but you will find clean and cozy rooms wherever you go. Oh, and one tip I got from fellow trekkers: avoid the first tea house when you enter Ramche. The newer Eastern tea house is much better. For the Kangchenjunga circuit, it's really just an average of what we've discussed so far. The only extra tea house you'll add to your itinerary is at Sililifedi, and it fits right in with the basic but cozy vibe of the other places. One last note, there are fewer tea houses here than in other trekking regions. With Kangchenjunga becoming more popular, the tea houses can get crowded, especially in November during peak season. If you want a quieter experience, try the start or end of fall or go in spring. There is a lot of trail per each tea house though, so the actual traffic will never be anywhere near as dense as in other areas, at least not for the foreseeable future. Moving on. The next topic is the local culture. As usual, we don't want to comment on the local culture itself, but much rather tell you how much of that culture you can experience while trekking and how deep you can immerse yourself into it. On the North Base Camp trek, you're in for a treat. Along the way, you'll pass through small farming hamlets and proper villages like Gyabla. By the way, if you want to see the actual village, it's hidden just northwest of the trail behind a small ridge with a churton on top. And then there's Gunsa, a proper small town with one of the oldest Buddhist gompas in all of eastern Nepal, which is definitely worth a visit. If you're doing the South Base Camp trek, however, you will miss out on a lot of the cultural experiences. The valley is much quieter, and apart from a few tea houses and yak herders, not much is happening here. So if bustling villages and cultural experiences are your thing, the North Base Camp trek is where you want to be. As you can expect, besides prayer flags, there is not too much culture to be experienced on top of the mountain passes. So in terms of the full circuit, we're left with what we already discussed. So naturally it ranks between the culture-rich Gunsakola Valley and the pristine Simpuvakola Valley. Finally, let's talk about the landscape, because, let's be honest, that's probably why you're trekking in the Himalayas in the first place. On the North Base Camp trek, you'll start by winding through a narrow forested canyon. Over the course of 2 days, you'll climb through cardamom plantations, bamboo jungles and pine forests. Then, once you hit the wide cattle pastures of Fale, things start to change as the big mountains come into view. From Gunsa onward, you're in the mountain buff heaven. The Janu viewpoint near Kangchenjunga will blow your mind, and as you keep ascending to Lonak, you'll be surrounded by stunning 6,000 meter peaks and incredible views of the Kangchenjunga glacier. At the end of the valley in Pangpema, you'll be rewarded with views of several 7,000ers like Nepal Peak, Tent Peak and the Twins. You also get the best view of Kangchenjunga's north face that any non-mountaineer can get, if the weather cooperates. Considering the South Base Camp trek is a lot shorter, it's certainly not short in beautiful landscapes. The canyon, that is the lower Simbuva Valley, is even more narrow and more lush than the Gunsakola to the north. You'll be treated with great varying vegetation and dense bamboo, and later on pine forests on your way up. In terms of mountains, the South Base Camp trek doesn't disappoint either. The peaceful meadows along the Yalung Glacier are surrounded by dramatic peaks such as Ratong and Kabru. The star of the show is of course Kangchenjunga's south face, and the view towards it from Oktang is spectacular. Besides its main peak, you can also easily make out Kangchenjunga South, Yalongkang and Kambachen. Should you decide to trek the whole Kangchenjunga circuit, you will of course experience everything we mentioned thus far. You'll visit both base camp viewpoints, you'll hike through these wonderful forests, you'll admire Janu from close up, but it's not just adding up the 2 treks, it's more. The day you cross those high passes offers amazing views as well, including the famous Selilela stone lion, and additionally you get one of the most magical looking fairy tale forests I've ever been in, just south of Gunsa. Honestly, if I had to pick the most beautiful trek in Nepal, it would probably be a tie between Gokyo and the Kangchenjunga circuit. And there you have it, a hopefully complete and helpful guide to the 3 main treks you can do around Kangchenjunga. Let's take a final look at all 3 of them. Feel free to pause the video if you want to pay really close attention to our summary screens. The North Base Camp trek is the longer one of the 2 up and down style treks in the area. It takes about 11 days of trekking with some steep ascents early on. The landscape is breathtaking and Gunsa has comfortable lodges, diverse food, electricity and sometimes even a phone signal. But be ready for the tough final push to the base camp. The South Base Camp trek is shorter, doable in about a week if you're fast. It's easier than the northern route, especially at higher altitudes, but the lower Simbuva Valley has some tough sections. The valley is quite empty in terms of settlements, but offers pristine nature hardly to be found on any other lodge trek in Nepal. The Kangchenjunga circuit is the ultimate adventure. It combines the best of both treks with a bit more time on the trail, around 14 days of hiking depending on your pace. It even adds high passes and that fairy tale forest I mentioned to the mix. So, should you go to Kangchenjunga? And if so, which trek should you do? As usual, that depends a lot on what you want from your trek. The area is certainly interesting for anyone who wants epic views and empty trails, while also avoiding camping. This great combination comes with a price though. The big catch, at least for me, is how long and complicated traveling to the area is compared to Nepal's other trekking regions. I can start trekking in the Annapurnas after a 30-minute taxi ride from Pokhara. Or I could fly to Lukla and start trekking towards Mount Everest by 8 AM that same morning. When trekking Kangchenjunga, I need to pay for an expensive flight and then sit in a cramped jeep for about 13 hours. Each way. Considering the amount of days you can get off work is an important factor for many tourists, spending those valuable days smashing your kneecaps against the jeep seat might not be everyone's cup of tea. If you're short on time, dislike bumpy rides and other treks in Nepal are also still on your bucket list, the travel hassle might not be worth it for you. However, if the prospect of empty trails, remote valleys and dramatic peaks sounds appealing to you, and if your time budget and your butt are sturdy enough to get you there, the Kangchenjunga area and the Kangchenjunga circuit in particular will treat you with an adventure that is difficult to find anywhere else. And who knows, as more people discover this area, perhaps flights to Taplejung will become more reliable, making this incredible trek more accessible. Admittedly, this video got quite long, but we wanted to make sure we give you every bit of information you might need for preparing your trip to the foot of the world's 3rd highest mountain. If we missed anything or got something wrong, please leave a comment below. I, but also the other viewers, will appreciate this a lot. Also, don't hesitate to ask anything you like regarding trekking around Kangchenjunga or trekking in Nepal in general. I'll read and answer every single comment of yours. If you want to dive even deeper into these treks, you can check out the full trek videos on our channel. It's basically 90 minutes of me complaining about the weather, but you'll get an even better look at the mystical valleys of the eastern Himalaya. Besides that, we have videos on pretty much all of Nepal's popular lodge treks on our channel, so maybe check those out as well. And hey, if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up, it really helps us out. And if you're getting value from our channel, consider subscribing so you don't miss any future videos. It doesn't cost a thing, but it would make me very happy to earn your subscription. With that, thank you so much for watching, especially since you made it all the way to the end. Happy trekking, everyone!